Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. If you've been a fan of the channel for a while now, you might not know 10,000 things, but you probably do know around 1,000. So today I thought it would be fun to explore how Wan Shi Tong all-knowing works. We'll start with some easy examples and use that as a foundation to build some more challenging ones. Ready? Let's get started. We're mostly going to be dealing with Wan Shi Tong's bottom ability today, since it's part of this card that's new and it doesn't have a lot of analogs to compare it with that can help people understand how it works. But there was one thing that I wanted to talk about with its middle ability, because I expect that a lot of people are probably wondering about it. I hate to feel like a clickbaiter, so when using this ability to put a non-land permanent into somebody's library, that card's owner is the one who's instructed to take that action. So that person is the one who makes any necessary decisions related to that instruction, including whether to put the card close to the top or the bottom. Unfortunately, the CR support for this is somewhat weaker than the strong constructionists out there would probably like, relying on the fact that this rule refers to the player whom the instruction is addressed to, rather than the controller of the spell or ability that's resolving. But that's how it works, and that's how every other card with a similar effect, such as Ether Gust or Ether Spouts, has worked in the past. And now let's move on to the bottom ability. Before we talk about things in too much detail, I want to first cover some general advice in how to determine whether it triggers. If you've been a fan of the channel for a while now, you know that playing a Telling Time will not cause a Smothering Tithe to trigger. Now that's because even though you took a card from your library and put it into your hand, you did not officially draw a card. The physical action is the same, but the instruction that you followed did not use this specific game term, draw. So what you did does not count. In contrast, Wan Shi Tong uses the word put in its trigger condition. This is not a keyworded game term with special rules meaning, and therefore anything that matches the normal English meaning of putting a card into your library will cause Wan Shi Tong to trigger. So I don't think it should be too controversial to say that if I ousted a Grizzly Bears, that would cause Wan Shi Tong to trigger, but a Rishadan Pawn Shop or a Chaoswarp would also, even though these effects do not use the word put anywhere on them. Another important thing to note is that Wan Shi Tong only triggers when you put a card into a library. Tokens are not cards, so playing an Oust or a Chaoswarp against a token will not cause Wan Shi Tong to trigger. And yes, officially it is entirely possible to put a token into a library with cards like these. It's just that there's a state-based action that makes the token cease to exist immediately after that happens. So for practical reasons, people don't tend to physically do that. But according to the game, the token really does briefly enter the library. Unfortunately, the way Wan Shi Tong is worded, this doesn't cause the ability to trigger. So now that we've talked about what put and card mean, let's talk about the final word that has some major implications for how this ability functions. Into. Wan Shi Tong only triggers if you put a card into a library. It is not possible to do this with a card that's already in your library. In order to match the normal English definition of the word into, that card would need to start out not being in your library and end up being in your library. Let's practice with a few concrete examples. Does shuffling your library count? No. You need to take a card that isn't already in your library and put it into your library. If you take some cards that are already in your library and change their order, that doesn't count. All right, well, what if we bring back that Telling Time from earlier? Does it put cards into your library? And if you read carefully, you can see that it doesn't. You look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put 2 back. But these 2 cards were never officially anywhere besides your library. And therefore, you did not put any new cards into your library. You just changed the order of the ones that were already there. The same thing is true for scrying. Even though the cards you're scrying are physically separated from the rest of your library, officially, they're still considered to be in your library. Scrying does not trigger Wan Shi Tong. This answer does not change if you put the cards you scried to the top or the bottom, nor if you scry multiple cards rather than just one. For the same reason, Surveil and Clash are also not able to cause Wan Shi Tong to trigger, even though the physical actions taken when executing these mechanics might make it seem like they should. And that means, yeah, somewhat of a non-bow with the planetarium here. Neither scrying nor casting the top card of your library, nor even looking at that card and deciding to put it back causes Wan Shi Tong to trigger. Maybe the part that synergizes with Wan Shi Tong was in the wing that Lieutenant Zhao burned down. On the other hand, take a look at this Brainstorm. The first instruction on this card is to draw 3 cards. Now, this means that those cards really and truly leave your library and go to your hand. Afterwards, you take 2 cards from your hand and put them into your library. Therefore, this card actually does cause Wan Shi Tong to trigger. Here's another good one. Let's take a look at the official CR text for how Cascade works. Notice anything interesting? Cascade has you exile the cards from your library. After you cast one, the other cards get put on bottom. Because in this case, the cards really do leave the library and get put back in, Cascade will cause Wan Shi Tong to trigger. Now, unfortunately, the part where the cards that you didn't cast get put on bottom of your library happens during the resolution of the Cascade ability, which is before the card that you cascaded into resolves. Now, this means that if you cascade into a Wan Shi Tong, you would not get any tokens. Next up, what about this Darksteel Colossus? Specifically, if you mill Darksteel Colossus, would that cause Wan Shi Tong to trigger? In order to answer this, the first thing that we'll notice is that Darksteel Colossus' ability that shuffles it into your library is a replacement effect, as indicated by the use of the word instead. This means that there is no time during this event where Darksteel Colossus is officially in your graveyard. The actual event that happens in the game is that you're instructed to mill some number of cards, so you pick up that many cards from the top of your library, then you reveal all of them and see that Darksteel Colossus has an ability that makes you shuffle it into your library instead of putting it in the graveyard, and so you do that. Because Darksteel Colossus never left your library, shuffling it back in does not count as a card being put into your library. Pretty weird, right? I went into more detail about this process in my video about Glimpse the Unthinkable and World Spineworm. Another time when replacement effects come up is in Commander. You probably already know that if your commander leaves the battlefield, you can put it back in the command zone. Now, the rule that lets you do this when your commander is going to the library is a replacement effect, which means that it works exactly like the Darksteel Colossus example. There's no time in which the commander is physically put into your library if it goes to the command zone this way, which means Wan Shi Tong does not trigger. Be careful, the rule that applies if a commander goes to the command zone from a public zone such as the graveyard or exile works differently. The commander really does actually move to those zones briefly before going to the command zone, so that can cause some rulings to work differently. I talked about this in my video about chaos warping a commander. The next thing that I wanted to talk about would be determining how many times Wan Shi Tong triggers. If you play out Reminisce, it doesn't matter how many cards are in your graveyard. Wan Shi Tong will only trigger once. That's because it only uses the word shuffle once, meaning that all the cards from your graveyard are officially getting shuffled in at the same time as part of the same game event. This only constitutes a single instance of one or more cards being put into a library. For the same reason, Brainstorm is considered to put both cards on top of your library at the same time and thus would not give multiple triggers. Consider this mnemonic nexus though. Wan Shi Tong triggers whenever cards are put into a library. This would mean it triggers once per library that has cards put into it. Shuffling cards into 4 different libraries would match this trigger condition 4 times. To put it plainly, mnemonic nexus would make Wan Shi Tong trigger once for each player, assuming that each of their graveyards had at least one card to shuffle in. Let's close out with an example that brings together a lot of the points that we've talked about so far and adds one last one. Amy plays Sway of the Stars while she controls Wan Shi Tong. How many times does Wan Shi Tong trigger? To start out, we'll observe that Sway of the Stars only uses the word shuffle once. This means officially everything is getting shuffled in all at the same time as part of the same game event. Next, we'll recall that Wan Shi Tong triggers once per library, but it does not trigger additional times if multiple cards go into the same library at the same time. This means Wan Shi Tong will only trigger once per player. Except, all the permanents are getting shuffled in, which means that Wan Shi Tong itself is not in play immediately after the trigger event for this ability happens. Is this a problem? Well, if we were talking about a normal triggered ability, yes. Normally, objects that exist immediately after a game event are checked to see if they have any abilities that have triggered. Some types of triggered abilities, though, have special handling and are able to look back in time to the moment before that trigger event happened to see if they should trigger. Abilities that trigger when an object that all players can see is moved into a library are one example of an ability that can look back in time. This means that Wan Shi Tong's ability that creates tokens will trigger when Wan Shi Tong itself is put into a library, whether that be from an oust, a chaos warp, or Sway of the Stars as we have here. Accordingly, Amy will get 1 trigger for each player who had anything shuffled into their library with this play. Pretty cool, right? And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.